We are talking tomatoes on our domestic commodities market update today. Nigeria is the second largest producer of tomatoes in Africa and one of the largest producers in the world, producing approximately 3.82 million metric tons annually, accounting for about 2.11% of the total global production. However, Nigeria exports only about 450 metric tons of tomatoes every year. Why is that happening? Let's talk to Sheyi Omidiora, one of the research analysts with Financial Derivatives Company. Hello, Sheyi. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Although Nigeria is the second largest producer of tomatoes in Africa, exports are really low. What are the challenges of tomato farming in the country, and in what ways can Nigeria overcome these problems?
What we have seen with tomatoes is that it's mostly grown in the north and north central basin of the country, where small farmers are typically responsible for about 90% of tomato production. Now, these small farmers actually produce a lot independently on their own, but then there is some aggregation problem in terms of bringing their produce to the markets and to form a super supply group, and that's a major problem. Now, for these farmlands, some of these farmlands are also situated in places that are inaccessible. And for some of these smallholder farms, it's probably cheaper for them to actually let their tomatoes go to waste instead of bringing it to the market. This is probably a fallout from the fact that there are no super aggregators who can efficiently pull all these products together and efficiently bring it to the market. In addition to that, another thing we should look at is the fact that tomatoes are highly perishable products. They are difficult to store and also difficult to transport. Now, for the tomatoes that eventually manage to make it out of these secluded locations, some of these secluded farmlands, and brought to the market, so a lot of them get damaged in transit. And for them, for those that don't get damaged in transit, they eventually might get infected by this common tomato infection. Now, again, it's probably a fallout from the fact that there are no super aggregators who can actually provide or procure infrastructure, transport and storage infrastructure. And for these smallholder farms, it might be impossible or does not even economically make sense for them to procure this infrastructure themselves. So that's some of the factors at play here.
Now, the price of a basket of tomato has been stable at about 7,000 naira in the last 2 months. In the past year, prices were incredibly volatile, attaining a low of 6,000 naira and reaching a high of 35,000 naira in the 12-month period. So what factors were responsible for this, and what is the outlook for tomato prices in the short term?
Now, for tomatoes and largely locally produced farm produce in Nigeria, it's always a factor of, it's always a question of two things. The first one being security in the north, and the second being the perennial flooding that occurs in the north. Now, we saw in late October last year where prices skyrocketed to as high as 35,000 naira. And this was during the floods when loads of people were displaced in places like Kano, in Jigawa, in Sokoto. And of course, with that, it reduced the supply drastically, which actually pushed up prices sporadically. Now, as regards the outlook for tomato prices, we know that tomatoes are a staple in Nigeria's culinary repertoire. We also know that while there are close substitutes, people still tend to go towards tomatoes. People tend to favor tomatoes for their cooking. Now, we also know that while people will pick tomatoes over other products, they also tend to not want to move away from tomatoes again. And this, of course, will tend to push up the price of tomatoes. We also know that Easter is fast approaching in about 8 weeks. And with that as well, there will tend to be an increase in demand for tomatoes. And this, of course, will also push up tomato prices in the short run.
A quick one before I let you go, Sheyi. We've seen, of course, that from what you have said, a lot of tomato is being wasted because of poor storage. So how much of backward integration, from tomato paste manufacturers are we likely to see in the near future?
I believe this is a function of how many firms are large enough and have the financial and technical wherewithal to pull this off. One of the primary concerns or one of the primary problems with actually making tomato paste in Nigeria is the quality of our tomatoes. Now, our tomatoes actually contain a large volume of water of about 40%. This does not actually produce the quality of paste and consistency of paste that tomato paste makers or producers, manufacturers would like to see. Now, we recently saw Dangote set up a a greenhouse facility where hybrid tomato seedlings were produced annually. About 350 million tons of tomato seedlings are produced annually. And these seedlings are capable of producing between 40 million and 70 million tons per hectare annually. This is way above the current average we produce, which is at about 5.7 million hectares per year. Now, again, as I said, it's not a lot of firms have the financial and technical wherewithal to pull this off. So while we might actually see some backward integration, I don't think it's going to be something that will be widespread in the country.
All right. Thank you very much, Sheyi. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks for your time. The International Monetary Fund has raised its economic outlook for the Middle East and North Africa region's growth in 2020 by 1.2% to an overall contraction of 3.8%, showing that despite some progress since the coronavirus pandemic began, it has still been a brutal year by any account. According to the IMF, recovery will be varied and based largely on countries' investments and strategies for vaccine distribution. However, the IMF says there has been one bright spot for the Gulf states in particular, and that's the lifting of the political and economic blockade of Qatar by other GCC countries. And the African Development Bank has provided a grant of $14 million to South Sudan to boost agriculture and reduce the nation's dependence on oil. According to the AFDB, the fund is aimed at enhancing agricultural productivity and boosting marketing and trade of agricultural products in the North African country. The grant will also support the agricultural markets, value addition, and trade development projects by the UN Food Agricultural Organization. And Kenya is among countries set to receive COVAX COVID-19 vaccines before the end of February. In a report released by COVAX, Kenya will receive 4.176 million doses as Uganda receives 3.552 million doses of the vaccine in the region, while Rwanda will receive 996,000 doses. COVAX says it currently anticipates 1.2 million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which will be available to the COVAX facility in the first quarter of 2021, subject to the completion of additional agreements. And that's a wrap on the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Chimeze Obi.